here with another episode of TubbTalk, the podcast for managed service providers. Now, if there's one thing that repeatedly plays on the mind of an MSP, it's cybersecurity, the risk of cybersecurity. So today I've invited a guest who has over 20 years experience in the cybersecurity industry and has got a really deep understanding of client needs. So Matt Middleton-Leal is the Managing Director, EMEA North of Qualys, a pioneering and leading provider of disruptive cloud-based IT, security and compliance solutions. And Matt is an industry veteran who's been helping businesses get to grips with governance, with risk and compliance challenges for well over 2 decades now. From cybersecurity threats to making sense of regulatory requirements, Matt really knows his stuff, and he's here to share insights that will help you as a managed service provider stay secure, compliant, and ahead of the game. Matt, it's a real thrill to have you here. Welcome to TubbTalk.
Well, Richard, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the invite to join you. It's delighted to be here, and looking forward to sharing with you, some insights and some of the, the learnings that I've had over that what feels like a short period of time, but clearly is not.
Yeah, and I said experience. I've been doing this a couple of decades or more. You've been doing it. So when we say experience, we definitely don't mean old, do we? We do mean
Absolutely
experience.
Not. Absolutely, 100%.
Well, thanks again for joining us. So I guess we were just chatting just before we came on air. You're in Paris at the moment, aren't you? And you've just jumped out of your day. So I appreciate you taking time out to speak to us. But let's start out by talking about Qualys. For anybody who isn't familiar with the company, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so Qualys was founded in 1999, and we were one of the real first providers of security via the SaaS platform. So we actually were a pioneer back in the day with our previous CEO, Philippe Courteau, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And we started out providing vulnerability management. That was our bread and butter, if you like. But then as we built out the platform, we found that organizations kept coming to us and asking us, could you provide X service? Could you provide Y service? So the platform has grown from that traditional, what was vulnerability scanning from the cloud, now to 21 plus modules, right from vulnerability scanning right up to the ability to manage and mitigate customers' risk. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, is that risk element and how we see the evolution from an MSP perspective of how customers and partners are starting to demand those services. And I think that's the key here, and why Qualys has changed, because the market demand has changed. Because for too long we've been operating and frankly not fixing problems, because we are still getting hit all the time as an industry, right, with ransomware, with threats, etc. So what have we got to do differently? So that's really what I want to cover today.
Yeah, and definitely I want to dig more into that side of things. But let's let the listener get to know you a little bit more. I mentioned you've got a ton of experience in this space. So talk us through your own journey to becoming Managing Director, EMEA North of Qualys.
Well, I guess if we go way back, I'm probably quite similar to a lot of IT guys, right? The school wasn't maybe built for me perfectly. So I probably struggled a little bit at school with the whole concept and rigor around that. And I left at age 16, pretty early to leave school. And I went and did actually an apprenticeship in engineering. And I spent 4 years learning to be an aeronautical engineer, which I absolutely adored. And it taught me a lot of skills and practices around risk, tolerance, behavior, testing, all these things which the IT industry isn't very good at, frankly.
Yeah.
And so from that background, all through my career, and I've had multiple jobs, I've been a service provider, I worked for a company what was called Sema Group, which then became Atos Origin. I've worked for IBM, I've worked for software vendors, I've worked for high growth software vendors in cybersecurity. So I've really seen this from all different angles, which over my kind of lifetime, I guess, in this industry, is given me what I think quite a balanced view on these challenges and how to help people.
I should say so, yeah. I was, when we connected on LinkedIn prior to the conversation, checking out some of the experience you've got. You really have been there and done that in most areas of the industry. So that's why I was so excited to have you on to talk about it today. But Matt, you alluded to it there at the start of the conversation. MSPs, MSSPs, service providers, they often zero in on security. But there is that bigger conversation around risk that they might be missing. So tell us your thoughts on that.
I think it's a bit of an inherent challenge, I think, with us as a society, in that When we hear a keyword or a phrase, we use vulnerability as that's the example here. Right? If someone comes to us and says, "Hey, we've got a problem with vulnerability management," and it's the same with a service provider, their mind immediately goes to, "Well, I've got a nail, I need a hammer." Right? That's the thought process. I've got a vulnerability, I need a vulnerability management tool. But as service providers, we've got to step back and say, okay, so what is it that you're actually trying to secure, and why is it you're trying to secure it? What is the inherent risk behind not doing it? Because it actually might not be a vulnerability management tool they need per se. They might actually need a patching tool, or they might need something completely different, but we might have missed the point. Therefore, we missed the opportunity to sell what great services we have and actually solve real customer pain. So it's very much about, as an industry and as individuals, stepping back, understanding the why question. I was taught from a very young age, whenever someone asks you something, just say politely, why do you need it? What benefit do you need to gain from this so we can help you actually achieve your actual goal versus what you may have written on a piece of paper. That's probably the starting point, I'd say.
I'm fascinated. So you mentioned when you left school at 16. I did the same thing, 16, 17. I dropped out to run my own business and to do things. So like you, I probably felt school wasn't built for me. But what you learned outside of the IT industry in those formative few years, I'm a great believer in the IT industry should be looking outside of its sort of borders to learn from other industries. So if we rewind a little bit, tell us about those early days. What did you learn about risk and, get into root cause analysis, that type of thing?
Yeah, so I'd say that when you're building parts for aircraft, the ultimate risk is that aircraft falling out of the sky.
Absolutely.
So we are talking, risk of life, and it just completely changes the attitude and the due diligence you put around release cycles, etc. So, what tolerance levels am I actually working to when I'm building or engineering a component? Now, if we take that into the software world, right, I think we're very lapsadaisical about how we build software. For example, I've Googled it and I found there's an app or a piece of code on the internet that looks just like it's going to do what I need it to do, and I'm going to download it, and now it's embedded in my code. And guess what? I'm sure it's secure because someone's published it. So the whole concept of how we approach our day-to-day lives, I think, is very laissez-faire. Whereas back when I was doing engineering, everything was focused around what is the potential impact of something going wrong with what you're doing, and understanding that and be able to measure it. So that's the basis of everything that I was taught, in those early years.
Yeah, makes sense. There's going to be lots of MSPs, MSSPs, solution providers listening to this who, as we said at the start of the conversation, are focused on cybersecurity rather than risk. Do you think there's a missed opportunity there, Matt? Because in your experience, how effective are businesses managing risk, and are they truly, MSPs and so on, are they truly communicating this at board level? Is this something that boards and stakeholders, decision makers, would understand more effectively than cybersecurity?
That's a very broad question. I'll do my best to answer it for you. So, firstly, do they understand risk? If you say you're a cybersecurity provider, your only role is reducing risk. That's your job, right? So, do we articulate it in that way? Potentially, no, not always. Should we? Probably. So the actual fundamental goal is kind of, how do you measure it? So how much risk is there? How do you then communicate that risk? And then what do you do about remediating it? So those are the kind of three main steps that these organizations and these service providers need to go through. Now, once you understand that, you can then go to the board and have a more sensible conversation, because you now know the scale of the risk, you can communicate it. But if you then articulate the remediation in terms of, hey, Mr. Board or board chairperson, whatever it may be, we need to go and we need to spend, I don't know, $500,000, whatever it may be, £100, whatever the amount is. The reason we need to do that is because our current risk profile looks like this, and we need to reduce it by X. You can start to have a numerical conversation around risk reduction, which is what the board understands. And today, too often, a CISO will go into that board conversation and say, for example, we need to implement two-factor authentication. I need 500,000 for it, whatever the number is. And the board goes, brilliant, okay, that sounds very sensible, but why? And it's, well, because, people get threats. If we do this, no one will be able to get into our organization. And they'll say, so how much more secure will I be once we've done that than I was yesterday? Well, I don't quite know how to answer that question. So that's where this starts to unravel, because we talk a language which is very different from a technology perspective to what the board expects. So we need to empower our community to get better metrics and better understanding and better communication skills to articulate business challenges from a cyber perspective. And when we do that, we'll get the right level of investment and actually start to make significant change and demystify, if you like, this industry that we work in.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I was brought up in business. My mentors always taught me manage by metrics rather than gut feeling. And there is, with cybersecurity, isn't there? There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt. Oh, you've got to do this because terrible things might happen. But as you say, at the board level or business owners, even stakeholders, they decide if you can provide them with the metrics there and say, this is where we are now, this is where we'll be after the investment, they're much more likely to understand that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Something I pick up on as well. So Qualys, as a company, most of the listeners here are going to be familiar with the concept of a SOC, a Security Operations Center. But Qualys, you've introduced this concept of a Risk Operations Center, or a ROC. So tell us more about this. How does it differ from like traditional Security Operations Center or other, managed security services?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So if I tell you a very quick story, a quick anecdote.
Please.
So about 4 years ago, Qualys came out and said, hey, we're going to introduce patching for CISOs, the ability for a CISO to go and remediate a risk. And a lot of people kind of laughed and went, that's not happening, right? We're not going to go that. We're not going to take responsibility for remediation of threats and vulnerabilities, right? We just report the news. We're not solving the problems that we're articulating. Now, last year, we deployed globally over 105 million patches through the Qualys platform, right? And so the question is why? Well, because what we were doing previously wasn't working. We had SOCs which were fantastic at finding incidents, solving them, working on an incident, doing the triage, etc. But actually, if you think about that as a concept, if the incident has occurred, we're too late. We don't want to be, the classic, I don't want to shut the stable door when the horse is gone, right?
Yeah.
The ROC is about getting to the stable well in advance, understanding, back to measuring the risk, communicating with the right stakeholders in the business, and then having the power, tooling, and capabilities to actually solve some of the problems. And it might not be a patch, by the way. It might be that we need to change a configuration. It might be we need to upgrade a particular platform or a particular piece of software in our business. And actually, what we're seeing a huge amount of is the technical debt in organizations, which traditionally the security teams wouldn't look at. The technical debt represents a significant amount of the vulnerabilities and configuration issues in an organization. So actually for a CISO to be empowered by that information and go back to the CFO, whoever it is, and say, guys, if you can actually get rid of this stuff, and by the way, no one's using it because I can see, with my ROC, I can see that the last use date on that software is, 6 months ago. No one's actually using it. It's presenting 20% of the risk in our business is generated by that legacy tech debt. Can we remove it? You start to have the far more interactive conversation, and you start to have that kind of breaking down silos within the business. So the ROC is about empowering security teams to break down silos and can communicate more effectively with the business and get ahead of the threat before it hits the SOC. So hopefully that describes it.
It does indeed. I'm really interested in this, and I think I'm going to take a leap here. I think the concept of a ROC is going to be a new concept to many people listening today. So we have a lot, big audience of the owners of managed service providers who listen to this show. What's the opportunity here for MSPs, Matt? Like, what's the opportunity for them to develop and deliver a managed ROC service? What would that offering ideally look like for an MSP or an MSSP?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say through gritted teeth is it's not all about Qualys technology. As much as I'd like it to be 100%,
Sure.
this is really about bringing together multiple capabilities which many businesses have today, integrating them and normalizing the risk data, not the SOC, not the SIEM, not that stuff that traditionally we've done in the SOC, the risk data, and building services around that. So we actually see there's kind of 4 key service areas, and what we're kind of classing it as is the managed ROC, the MROC, because we love an acronym, right? So the MROC gives, we believe, MSPs to build 4 services. So they are around cyber risk quantification advisory services, So what is the risk? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to quantify it from a financial perspective? So that high level consulting perspective. Onboarding of technologies to help them manage, measure, and communicate. Ongoing risk monitoring services. And then finally, probably the most important one is the remediation services. So there's 4 clear service definitions for MSSPs to go out and actually pitch to their customers to help kind of change the way they do business. And those services, yes, they probably use some Qualys technology. It won't all be Qualys technology, but the integrated story and the methodology and the change in focus for those customers will help them hopefully get ahead of that threat, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, very interesting. It occurs to me, based on your history, we talked about your formative years, so you've had this risk mindset sort of drilled into you a little bit. There are going to be people listening, as we say, who are focused on cybersecurity, less so the risk. So for MSPs, MSSP solution providers considering moving in to this ROC space, what skills or mindset shifts do you think that they're going to need to succeed?
Yeah, I guess the mindset shift. Actually, if I quote Sophos right here, because they do some pretty good research. So in 2024, they did a analysis of 5,000 organizations. And of those 5,000, 59% of them had some form of ransomware attack in 2024.
Crazy, yeah.
Right. I mean, it beggars belief that we're still quoting statistics like that. So in terms of that mindset shift, I think the mindset shift is what we're doing today isn't working. That's the mindset shift, right? And I think if you go into these organizations and say, we need to change, we need to do something differently, I don't think you're going to get a door closed in your face. I think most people are going to say, yeah, give me some ideas about how I can shift, how I can change the way I go to market and what I need to do. And I actually think a lot of the skills, by the way, are already here. I don't think we're talking about completely changing the skills marketplace, because the ability to remediate, the ability to monitor, all that stuff is out there. The bit I think that needs to come into place is maybe some more political skills. I think the CISOs need to become a little bit more kind of as an orchestrator, if you like, in a business to get departments talking together, to get them working more proactively, in cohesion, if you like, and breaking down some of the silos that exist. And I think the larger the customers are that you're supporting, the more silos you get. And I think it gets even more complicated. So I'm very lucky. I talk to CISOs every week. And they all have these challenges. Some will say to me, we've got a great relationship with our remediation teams. But that's typically driven because they've gone out and physically spoken to them. They're not sharing tools. They're not sharing processes. Maybe at kind of a ServiceNow level or a Jira, whatever the ITSM capability is. But they're not truly sharing an end-to-end process where they are integrated as a business. And I think that's the silos we need to break down. That's why a CISO needs to become a politician. And that's probably the one skill they could probably all do changing.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And I think most people who get into this space usually do so from a technical perspective first, don't they? So for some people, that is going to be a big change in mindset to actually think, it's going to be more about the conversations there. I'm intrigued, though. So Qualys, obviously you are pioneers in what we talked about here. You've pivoted, you've expanded, your offerings across the board. And the concept of a ROC is something that you introduced to the market, I would say. So, but from your viewpoint over the past few years, what is driving businesses to invest more deeply in risk management? And I guess there's a follow-on question from that, which is, are they prepared to pay MSPs, MSSP solution providers for this as a service?
Good question. So I think we've kind of covered why they're changing. I think we're there. Yeah. But I guess the driver is not just that the threats aren't going away and that we're not solving them. I think it's always been there. I think if you speak to any CISO, they'll say, yes, we manage our business from a risk perspective. I measure the risk. So if you look at cyber risk quantification, for example, right, cyber risk quantification isn't new. It's been around for many, many years. And there are some very complex mathematical kind of models to help you achieve it. The issue is it's a massively laborious task. The data you need to put into it is often spurious at best. So what we're trying to do and what we're trying to empower organizations to do is use technology to help them drive that risk methodology in a more proactive fashion, which is not massively expensive. So we don't think MSSPs per se, they may help with that quantification process, by the way. We don't think that's the biggest driver for business. We think the output of that, understanding their holistic risk, because let's face it, lots of organizations today will maybe use a CMDB as their benchmark for their asset control. Now, a successful CMDB project, if it's 90% accurate, I think CMDB team will be slapping themselves on the back and saying, what a wonderful job, that's our ROI's built. CISO's going, hang on a minute, 1 in every 10 asset I might not know about. It's a little bit terrifying. So I think all these things together are changing, and I think that's where the MSSP comes in and say, hey, if we can help you better discover those assets, better manage them, better measure them, better articulate the risk, I think people will pay, because I think CISOs know the problem's there. I think some of the time they're just kind of hiding from it a little bit. I don't want to tell them they're not doing a good job, because it's a very tough job. We all know that. CISO burnout is a big thing. But I think because they haven't had the data as accurate as they want, I think sometimes they shy away from it.
Yeah. Let's jump into the weeds a little bit with this. So people are going to be listening to this, the concept is perhaps new to them. They're going to be looking at, okay, what are the benefits to us? I know from the conversations I have with MSPs, MSSPs, like the holy grail for them is to be seen as that trusted advisor, to be seen as something other than just the tech guys, the IT guys within the business there. So how can MSPs, people listening to this, leverage risk management conversations to move from that almost like that tactical IT provider space to the strategic long-term partners for their clients? Is that possible? Is that something you see happening?
Yeah, and I don't want to keep going back to the technology, but I need to a little bit with your question, right? Yeah. Because, I think the data that you can generate is fundamental to achieving that outcome. And the way in which you then articulate that data and manipulate it gives them the ability to change their perception. So if they're going in and they're saying, today we stopped 10 pieces of malicious code in the environment, and the CISO will go to the partner, brilliant, amazing. But so what? What does that mean? If you hadn't have stopped it, what would have happened? Now, if they can then start saying, we stopped 10 pieces of malicious code entering your CI/CD pipeline, actually, which would have gone live on your production website later that day, which, by the way, is generating for you about 10K an hour in revenue, and it could have potentially shut that down for anything from 1 to 5 hours, it would have cost you an impact potentially on your revenue of 50K. Suddenly you become very strategic to that business because you understand their business pain. So it's about the MSSP elevating their message and understanding, back at the start we talked about the why. The why is, why am I doing vulnerability management? Because I don't want my website to shut down. and so that's the way I think organizations need to start changing their language, changing their approach to articulate the challenge in more than those terms, proper business terms. We need to become business people.
Yeah, and we've been saying it for so many years, but this is another classic, a really strong argument for why we need to be doing that. So it's tangible, isn't it? Almost, you can see it, it's understandable. We talk about the opportunities. I also want to, as a almost like devil's advocate here, want to talk about the hurdles that MSPs, MSSPs will face. So when they're trying to operate, risk management for their clients, put that into practice, what are the hurdles that they're going to face? What are some of the pushbacks, Matt, that you've experienced in your career?
Yeah, technologies can always be challenging. It doesn't work that way, or it doesn't do X, it doesn't do Y. But actually the biggest hurdle is change. The mantra that if you're not changing, you're effectively going backwards because the market's left you, right? And I think in IT, we have too many people that are fearful of change, which in such an aggressive market space where digital transformation is happening at such an incredible pace, it seems crazy that I'm even saying that.
Isn't it?
Why am I
blows
saying
my mind.
Yeah.
Why are people working in an industry that changes all the time so
Absolutely.
resistant to change? Yeah.
So they're super happy to upgrade a piece of software, but then they won't look at the process they are undertaking, because it is typically the process piece is the hurdle, by the way. It's not the technology. It's the processes by which an organization manages, the organizational structure that they put around their business. They are the hurdles. So we had a breakfast meeting with a bunch of customers, I think it was last month from memory, and the topic was, how can I get my organization to change the way we think about remediation? And there were customers in there just discussing the challenges. Well, our IT ops department, they have this process, and that's the way it is, so we just have to fit in with that. And we were saying, well, okay, get that, but who's challenging that? Who's to say that is the right process? So that's the hurdle, to go in and get to the right person that wants to be a change agent. And we all need to identify that person who's going to help us drive that change. You know, yes, you're working brilliant, everyone's doing a great job, but could we do a better job if we just tweaked it slightly? That's the question.
Yeah. One of my pet peeves I'll share with you is that old thing, perhaps you've come across it, when, especially as a younger man in the industry, I used to ask, why do we do things this way? And sometimes the answer would come back, because we've always done it that way. That's the way it is. And I loathe that. I had because I really want to get to the bottom of it. So do you ever come across that as well, where people are super resistant because, well, we've always done it that way, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it? But you're suggesting what we're doing is perhaps not the best way of doing things at the moment, so it is broke.
Every day.
Yes, really.
Yeah. I generally believe, though, that the cyber teams are more open to change than the traditional IT operations teams. I think because we get the risk, we understand it, and we live and breathe it. I think we know we need to change, but I think the traditional process, I mean, especially if you go to some big banks, for example, right? That, oh yeah, we're going to change. It's going to take about 2 years to change that process. We're like, what? You know, it's just mad. We've got to change that perception. We've got to find those people, as I mentioned, that that want to make a difference and are prepared to stand up and say, no, this isn't right.
Yeah, I don't want to go off at too much of a tangent, but I want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier about burnout, about the mental health challenges, to paraphrase, if I may. So it strikes me, during the course of this conversation, that the way we're doing things at the moment puts an incredible amount of stress and load on cyber security, CISO shoulders, people who are involved in this. So do you see, what you're advocating here, moving to a more risk-based approach, as helping with that challenge that people have within the industry of getting burnt out?
I do, and it is a real problem, right? Even
really
for my own teams, I know that we ask them to do a lot. The cost of money now means none of us have got kind of excessive headcount that we can kind of deploy, so everyone is working hard, and so I fully get the challenge. I think the area where technology can help, and actually, I've got a whole podcast. I haven't said AI yet.
I was just thinking that buzzword bingo. We've got about 40 minutes in without mentioning it. Yeah.
Sorry.
We have now.
So I think it's the automation where we need to focus. The automation of repetitive tasks. It's not about automating everything, because I think that, like AI is not going to take over the world, automation is not going to solve all our problems. But I think we can significantly help remove stress, remove workload from people by automating really daft tasks. Let me give you a very simple example. How many patch jobs do organizations have to build for browsers? Right? How many updates come out for browsers on a weekly basis? I mean, it's a ridiculous task. Our recommendation is, if you measure it from a risk perspective, it's incredibly low risk. Therefore, just automate it. Just take it off everyone's desk. Just have it done. Just auto-update it. Why are you even worrying about it? And it's, if you look for and identify those areas of low risk, high volume issues, you can actually start to remove workload and actually allow people to focus on those high risk items, because we now measure through risk, right? We've measured it, we've communicated it. They can focus on those really important jobs, spend their time there. And I think it's more rewarding for people as well, by the way, because a lot of the challenges are people feel overwhelmed and under I can't think of the right word, undervalued, that's it, thank you. Undervalued, yeah. But I think if you then give them more interesting tasks to undertake, I think it improves everything. So I think that's the future, personally.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to sort of beat the drum on this overly, but let's talk about the benefits again. So how can MSPs turn good governance into a competitive advantage? Because there's lots of MSPs, MSSPs watching this. They're looking for a way to differentiate themselves from others in the marketplace. This strikes me as something really significantly a competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's another good question. So if we're talking about governance from how do we ensure we're doing our jobs the right way and we're doing it repetitively in the right way, I think that is absolutely what the MSSP can bring into this place, into this space, right? How can I help an organisation overhaul the way in which I resolve risk in my business today, and how can I put the process and people and technology around that to deliver that in a more effective, more measurable more measurable kind of bucket, if you like. And then once I've done that, how do I then report the outcomes of that activity to the board or to the auditors, whoever it may be, to say that I've achieved that? I think that's absolutely fundamental to what every MSSP should be doing. It's not just about reporting the news. Unless we're doing something about it, we're kind of wasting our time. You know, my CEO will often say, you know, I'm sick of seeing dashboards. I don't care how bad the problem is. I want to know someone's actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
And actually, we have a guy that works for us, a guy, who's our Chief Technology Risk Officer, a guy called Richard Searson, who was co-author of the book, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. And he talks about one of the most important measurements for a board is monitoring that risk is actually reducing over time. What is the velocity of risk coming into my business versus the velocity of risk that I'm burning down? And he said the biggest metric is that going south? He said, because if it's heading north from a trajectory perspective, we know we're seriously getting something wrong, or maybe something's changed out there in the world.
Yeah, and for the benefit of listeners, we'll include a link to that book in the show notes here. That sounds fascinating. What was the name of the book again?
It's How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity.
Wow, I like
Available
that.
on Amazon and all good
Yes, I was going to
bookstores.
say, we'll include a link to that. So, yeah,
Other books are available, I should say.
Other bookstores are available.
Yeah.
So we've talked about change quite a lot here. This is a lot for some people who have been doing cybersecurity traditionally. So I understand that totally. But let's look ahead to what trends around risk and compliance do you see, Matt, shaping the MSP, the MSSP landscape over the next few years? And can you give any advice to people on staying ahead of the curve?
Yeah, so I think if we look at what the National Cybersecurity Centre is doing in the UK, if you look at their guidelines, they had Cyber Essentials, they had Cyber Essentials Plus, very good guidelines, by the way. You know, most businesses are trying to adhere to them as much as possible. But then they did something a little bit more challenging, and they said, as an organisation, you should look to patch high-risk vulnerabilities on internal systems with 7 days of detection and external ones within 5 days of detection. Now, at the moment, it's a guideline. Right? Absolutely. If we look forward to the future, if we want to protect ourselves, I think these need to come more than guidelines. I think they need to be true ambitions that businesses want to adhere to. So if I'm an MSSP and I'm looking at the future is going to be how quickly can I help an organisation, but use that phrase burn down, how quickly can I build services and give support, whether it be manpower, by the way, whatever it may be, or technology. How can I get in the future the organisation to burn down that risk quicker so I can achieve some of those guidelines about removing risk? Because, drop the AI phrase in again, it's not just the good guys using AI, right? The bad guys are using it as well. And if they're using it, they're going to be finding holes, vulnerabilities in our technology stacks faster than we can remediate. So the future for me is how do we either allow MSSPs to remediate risk, or importantly, find a way of eliminating it. So can I make some technological change in a customer's environment that blocks that risk from being an impact, and therefore I can rest easy for the night or for the month or for the year, whatever it may be, until I can make a significant change to actually completely remove it from my business. So the future for me is that how do we build that kind of model where we help that burn down happen faster? So I think we're going to see that kind of growing hugely over the next years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. I'm intrigued as well with any new emerging technology, let alone any new emerging concept. You're going to get people who would jump on the bandwagon, and dare I say, and this is no knock on anybody, but you're going to get people who can really talk the talk, but perhaps not walk the walk. So, based on your experience at Qualys, what advice would you give to anybody listening on building that trust and credibility with the client, so that they can prove that they're delivering this, not just saying they are?
I think it comes back to, you know, KPIs, about, you know, having an agreed set of deliverables and articulating them clearly in terms of how you are progressing. Look for quick wins. I mean, we've been saying that in our industry, right, forever, but it's not changed. You know, you need to find an organisation that wants to go on that journey. You need to agree with them what you need to prove to deliver that outcome that they want to get. And remember, the outcome is not, I've detected 5 pieces of malware. The outcome is I've protected your application from getting hit by a piece of malware. It's finding those KPIs, where you're going to measure them, how you're going to measure them, and continuously articulate and communicate. You know, we often fall down as an industry in our communication skills are often pretty poor. You know, sending a 5,000 line Excel Right? That doesn't help anyone, frankly. And we still see that all the time, by the way.
Really?
It's yeah, oh my God, you wouldn't believe how often we see this. I'm like, I'm really sorry, guys, but how does that help anyone? All you've now done is you think you've removed a risk from the business. All you've done is you've now confused another part of the business, annoyed them, and they're now just probably going to ignore it.
Yeah, because you're bombarding them with data which they can't make anything of. So most people just turn off from it and go,
Absolutely.
okay, yeah.
Absolutely. So delivering context with information is absolutely fundamental to the success of everything we've talked about.
Yeah. You've been exceptionally good, Matt, about talking about how MSPs, MSSPs can adapt, and you've gone out of your way to not shill for Qualys here, and to sort of, but let's give you the opportunity. I want to talk about. There's going to be people listening to this and go, "This is a very smart guy for a very progressive organisation. I want to do business with them because I think we can build a partnership here." What does it look like for a company, for an MSSP? Or an MSP or a solution provider to partner with Qualys? What does that relationship look like?
So we have quite a non-traditional business model where we have a technical account management team which look after customers, but they very much work with our managed security providers. So when a provider signs up with Qualys, they have all the usual stuff, right? You'd expect, the partner portals, all that stuff, all those things, right? But it's the actual support model underneath. So we don't have any professional services in our business. We 100% rely on our partners to deliver those. But we have this huge technical account management team that sits underneath. So the moment they sign a customer, they work proactively with those partners to ensure success. Now, they may be just providing guidance on the initial deployment. It may be, hey, by the way, did you know that Qualys have just built a new capability? It could be really useful. So that ongoing communication, collaboration between my teams on the ground and our managed service providers, I think is a unique differentiator to the market. We don't sign partners and just say, off you go, good luck, thanks for coming, right? It's about that ongoing collaboration to continue customer success through the entire life cycle. And I think that's a real unique, and that's, I think, why our MSSPs really enjoy working with us.
Yeah, and again, for the benefit of listeners, what I'll do is I'll ask Matt in a bit to share more details. If you want to find out more about Qualys, we'll include it in the show notes as well. But Matt, I'm intrigued. Who is Matt Middleton-Leal outside of the cybersecurity industry? What do you do?
Well, I'm not on social media loads, firstly. So,
is that a conscious choice? Or?
That's a conscious choice.
Tell me about that. What because social media, and I should say before you answer that, I'm not setting up a trap for you here. I'm leaning more and more towards. I believe that if you're really good at what you do, people will find you without social media, but that goes against the grain. But tell me about your thinking behind it.
Yeah, so I do post, by the way, occasionally on LinkedIn and things like that, corporate stuff, which I think is interesting. But I think social media is good and bad. I'm a father of 2 teenage boys, so I see the impact it has on them. So that's really where my kind of reluctance, I guess, a little bit to engage too much on social media from a personal perspective. Business is different, right? So I think you have to separate these two things. There's the personal side and there's the business side. How do I use social media to interact with my customers? Of course I do. From a personal perspective, if you're asking about me, it's not something I do particularly. But having 2 teenage boys and seeing them grow up in a very different world to what I grew up in has probably driven my thought process around that quite significantly. I'm also married to a Scottish IT lawyer. I'm massively into rugby, which means the last few weeks with the Six Nations on in the UK has been a rather emotional roller coaster, shall we say, in our household. So yeah, I love doing DIY projects. I love building stuff. I love being outside. If I can be on the water, even better. More I can do outside and get away from digital detox, if you like, every now and again is super important to me personally. So that's probably a little bit about me, more than I share normally anyway.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. For me, it's so important what you've said as well. There's lots of people, who live and breathe this industry. And I'm like so many people, I'm a techie geek. I love the technology. I love the application for society. I use it at home and everything. But there's a really important part about getting away from that, isn't there? To remember
100%.
we're in a living, breathing world. So yeah, I'm intrigued as well. Aviation earlier on in your career, is that something that's still an interest that you take forward? Or?
Probably not, to be fair, with the amount of travel I do. I've probably gone off aviation, if I'm honest. um, the whole concept of travelling through airports and air travel at the moment, I won't even mention what happened last week in the UK.
Oh my goodness.
Thankfully, I wasn't there when it happened,
You're
but I
talking
could
about
reasonably.
Heathrow, I take it,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
no, it's not something I'm massively into. I prefer being on the water than flying over it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no worries. We mentioned on, social media, and I'm in agreement, broadly in agreement with you. I know all too well that being in the semi-public eye here can make you a target for cyber criminals. But being the MD of a super well-known, good guy business in this industry cannot be easy in that respect. So how do you keep your personal cybersecurity knowledge and skills up to date?
Well, firstly, many years ago, I decided to study and become CISSP qualified.
Yeah.
Even though I'm more of a business person than a technology guy these days, I thought it was important. If I was going to go out and talk to customers regularly, I felt I needed that kind of backbone of knowledge in my brain to gain credibility. I also travel a lot, as I mentioned, which gives me a lot of time to read. I'm regularly writing articles with the team, reading. But I think the biggest way in which I keep up to date is talking with our customers and our partners. You know, my job could very easily be sat behind a desk playing with Excel all day long, but that wouldn't interest me, and I wouldn't stay at a company very long. My passion is being with our partners and customers, understanding their pains, understanding what challenges they need to solve, and that really helps me stay ahead of what's going on. And feeding that back into Qualys as a whole as a business, and helping them to kind of work out where we're going to go next with the technology. What do we need to deliver? Where do we need to focus? All that sort of stuff. So I love that element of my job, and it's one of my favourite parts of my day.
Where do you think you're going to go next with the technology? What can we expect from Qualys over the next few years?
You're going to see us doubling down on risk and risk management, risk quantification. That's a huge area, and elimination of that risk. We recently released the results of our endpoint detection response capabilities. We have that capability. We've had it for a while now. Recently released the MITRE testing, and we kicked quite a few of the traditional players who wouldn't think we did in the testing. We did a very good job. We were very, very high on the table. But also in the CNAP space, we now have a very, very competitive CNAP offering, multiple capabilities to help secure organisations. And again, I think with what's happening in the marketplace and some rather crazy acquisition numbers flying around out there, sort of 32 billion, I think it's shaken that market up a touch. And I think there's going to be opportunity there for both us and our partners to go out there and win business together.
Yeah. And I guess a personal question. We've talked about the AI element. We've talked about how the good guys are using AI, but the bad guys are using AI as well. Are you optimistic about the future, Matt? About the future of risk cybersecurity, what this landscape looks like?
Well, I'm always a glass half full guy, right? So yeah, I am optimistic. I think the trajectory that we're on and the capabilities that are being delivered are phenomenal. I think the challenges are going to come if we ever take our foot off the gas, if there is some political or governmental change which somewhere inhibits our ability to respond in the appropriate fashion. I think we're going to see more regulation, by the way, back to that future-looking comment. I think it's inevitable. There's the European AI regulation that's come out recently. We're going to see that. We're going to have to put some guardrails around the way people interact with technology for their own safety, frankly, more than anything. We're seeing AI models. So Qualys recently released our AI security capability, by the way. And we did some tests on some recently released AI tools, shall we say. And it's public, by the way. It's on our website if anyone wants to go out and read it. You can see the testing we did.
We'll include a link to that in the show notes.
And some of the gaps we found and the ways it can be jailbroken are quite scary. So those are the guardrails and controls I'm talking about. We have to, if we're going to deliver this technology, put these controls so people are safe to themselves, because unfortunately not everyone knows what they're doing with technology. Could make some pretty risky mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I'm so grateful that you could make the time. As I said, you're in Paris, France at the moment, being out there meeting people, flitting around and that. I know you've got a train to catch back to London, yeah. So our time is sort of finite. But this has been absolutely fantastic. Sort of closing thoughts, is there anything that we've not covered that you think, this is super important that the MSP, the MSSP, solution provider market should be aware of?
I think the only thing I'd say, if we come back to that change, I think the market needs to consider how they are going to build services. I think just saying we're going to do an MDR, like a managed detection response service, I don't think that solves the problem. That solves a finite challenge. I think as an industry, we need to look at the holistic problem and how we solve it. And I think the MSSPs that look at these things, what's the risk I'm trying to solve versus what's the technological solution I'm selling, I think they're the ones that are going to really make a difference. So I would always recommend that, people in this space continue to evolve, continue to look at how they do that and look to how they solve those broader challenges and not just a particular technological kind of crisis point. That's probably my final statement.
Thank you. Yeah, I truly believe, I've been so excited about this conversation because I think that it's going to be something that we refer to for a long time to come. And I believe some people are going to be referring back to this conversation in due course and going, Matt said this up front. In fact, I'm going to go as far as this. I think there's so much good stuff in here. We're going to turn this into an ebook. So if you're listening to this, absolutely go and check out tubblog.co.uk. The hub for MSPs. We're going to turn this into an ebook as well. Really good conversation.
Thank you.
But Matt, I know you said you're not that active on social, but you are active on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So anybody wants to continue the conversation with you directly, LinkedIn the best place to find you?
Yeah, please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn and I'll connect you with the right person. I'm probably not the right person, by the way. I've got teams that look after our channel partners. They're probably the best people to continue the conversation, but I'm happy to facilitate that.
Well, let's talk about Qualys as well. So we mentioned earlier, if anybody's interested in looking what a relationship with Qualys looks like, where's the best place for them to go to take the first step?
Again, please feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah.
We've got teams globally. There's over 2,300 or something off the top of my head staff in Qualys now around the world in multiple different countries. So, if you don't know who you need to speak to, please feel free to reach out and we'll find the right person for you to interact with and help you be successful.
Well, thank you. This has been fantastic conversation, and the good news is you don't have to catch a flight back. You're catching the train. Very, very sensible given everything that's going on in Europe at the moment.
100%.
But Matt, I'll leave you to get off your train. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Cheers.